This is the Agora, the center of ancient Athenian public life. You could do just about anything here. Buy fresh food from a stand, shop for newly crafted goods, overhear a political debate, or even attend a class. If you wanted to get a glimpse of ancient society in action, the Agora is the first place you would go. And it wasn't only polite, civilized people who met there. Even women and slaves could be found in the Agora, finding a rare freedom to express their thoughts in the public space. With so many people meeting in the Agora every day, attempting to define how ancient Greek society felt about any topic is, quite frankly, impossible. Still, ancient Greek life was determined by the whims of the public. Even the most powerful leaders and politicians were known to visit the Agora to hear the opinions of the lower classes. The history of ancient Greece does not make sense without understanding the public decisions that shaped it. Today, I'm not claiming to tell you exactly how ancient Greek citizens felt about education, because I guarantee that if you went back and interviewed 100 Athenian citizens, you would receive 100 different responses. Still, it is my hope that by exploring a few of the most influential, or at least some of the loudest voices in ancient Greece, we may begin to see why the history of education played out as it did. Although every Athenian-born man was granted equal political agency, it was simply easier for those with more money to gain more power. People born into wealthier families generally gained better educations, allowing them to speak more eloquently. They were often more successful in politics simply because their upbringing helped them to become more charismatic. In addition, people with money to spare could use their wealth to boost their public perception. For example, in one speech, Athenian politician Demosthenes attempted to convince the public to support his proposal by pointing out all the times he had donated his money to help the Athenian public. Demosthenes would go on to be one of the most important figures in Athenian political history. There was a certain link between having wealth and gaining a better education. It was expected that all young boys received both the musicae and gymnasticae educations, but anything after that was up to the family. Those who could afford it might choose to take lessons with a philosopher or traveling sophist, while those who couldn't likely continued the trade of their parents. Plus, it was the express goal of several schools to train their students to be better political speakers. Take Isocrates' School of Rhetoric, for example. Yes, he taught his students geography and history, but everything he did was to prepare his students for the spotlight of political life. It makes sense that those who were able to afford Isocrates' school were more likely to succeed as politicians. With this power came a bit of snobbiness. As literacy began to increase in Athens, some philosophers, like Isocrates and Aristotle, began trying to make the idea of education more exclusive. Yes, most people could read, but could they understand true literature, true culture? They began arguing that education should be limited only to those who had earned it, whether through wealth or intellectual merit. Whether their opinions actually impacted the Athenian political culture is hard to say, but the idea of an elite intellectual class was at least put out there. Advanced education was in no way required to be a successful politician, but it certainly didn't hurt. Still, most modern scholars agree that ancient Greek economic classes were not as separate as we might assume. Sure, there were differences in the material wealth of families, in the kinds of lifestyles that they could afford or not, but it's not clear whether these material differences actually impacted families socially. After all, a wealthy family could choose not to send their children to philosophic schools and still achieve success in political life. On the other hand, someone who couldn't afford education could still become the most powerful man in Athens. At any rate, there may have been more of a distinction between those who got higher education and those who didn't than there was between economic classes. Well-educated citizens may have seen themselves as culturally superior, but uneducated citizens also had reasons to look down on higher education. They believed that a respectable career path should involve becoming an apprentice to learn the trade experience required for their job. An old archaic law from the 7th century BCE even required fathers to train their sons in some trade in order to support the future economy of Athens. One of the main criticisms of higher education was that it gave citizens the power to unfairly sway public opinion. Many in ancient Greece saw public speaking as a way to twist the truth, to manipulate people into furthering their own agendas. These were the main criticisms that Isocrates and Plato faced as teachers. People believed that their schools taught their students to be dishonest, and as a result, many stayed away. In response, Isocrates and Plato each published several pamphlets defending their schools, justifying that their idea of education was nothing like what the public feared. On the other hand, while many were worried about the power that came with higher education, others believed it to be useless. One of the best places to see criticism of education is in Aristophanes' comedy Clouds from 423 BCE. The play was written before any philosophers established permanent institutions, so the plot is focused instead on sophists. Still, Aristophanes' mockery of Socrates' lessons, which he consolidated into a school called the Thinkery, demonstrates many of the same criticisms of higher education that would persist for the next century. Aristophanes believed that this new education, where children abandoned trade skills to learn more about philosophy, was raising the new generation to be lazy, airheaded, and useless. Now, to be fair, he didn't approve of the old system of education either. He insisted that students who only learned musicae and gymnasticae were too primitive, that they never bathed or shaved. Aristophanes was, after all, a comedian. But Aristophanes' play presented a challenge for ancient teachers. They had to prove, once and for all, that their lessons were not only non-threatening, but actually useful for daily life. Over time, schools shifted from simply offering advanced knowledge, like Plato's Academy, to promising to teach their students better ways to live. This may be why, towards the end of the classical era, we begin to see schools that were more famous for their philosophies than for the knowledge they taught. Any school could teach its students math, but could that math actually prove useful in the long run? The philosophies of Epicureanism and Stoicism may have been an answer to the question posed by Aristophanes 100 years before. Over and over again, public opinion about ancient Greek education shaped not only the lives of students, but the schools themselves. Some teachers saw their advanced knowledge as a sign that they were superior, creating a rift between their students and the rest of society that may not have otherwise existed. When the general public feared that education would make people dishonest, teachers were quick to assure them that their schools posed no threat. When society's opinions swung the other way, calling education useless and lazy, schools once again adapted to prove their practical use. Public opinion continues to shape education today, even without an agora. Education has never been a simple, straightforward, non-controversial subject. It is constantly changing, adapting to fit modern technologies and discoveries, both shaping and being shaped by politics. Just as in ancient Greece, politics and education are two deeply intertwined vehicles for social change. You cannot receive an education without being influenced by the policies that guide it.